The training hall was silent in the way that only rooms built for violence can be silent, a quiet that had texture, weight, the held breath of a space that had witnessed too much discipline to ever fully relax. She had come to deliver fresh towels. That was all. The door was ajar, just 2 inches, just enough, and through that gap she saw him first. Han Suk-jin, standing still in the center of the polished floor, arms folded, the black serpent tattoo coiling from his collarbone to his neck, watching with the precision of a man who did not observe casually. Then she saw the boy, moving, every step exact, every breath controlled. A 7-year-old body executing forms that belonged to someone twice his age, twice his size, twice his years of pain. Her son, moving exactly like him. Please like, share, and subscribe. And stay, because this story will reach into your chest and rearrange something. The Han estate sat above the Hanam-dong district like a sentence that didn't need punctuation. Not ostentatious. Not in the way that new money announced itself with gold fixtures and unnecessary square footage. The mansion was restrained. Severe. A structure of dark basalt stone and architectural glass that absorbed the surrounding landscape rather than imposing upon it. The gardens were precise. Clipped boxwood, raked gravel, a reflecting pool that doubled the sky. Everything is curated. Everything is controlled. Everything, in other words, exactly like its owner. Zara Okonkwo had worked within these walls for 8 months. She knew the rhythms of the house the way she knew her own pulse, had mapped them out in her first week with the careful, survivalist attention of a woman who had learned, long before she arrived here, that knowing your environment was the difference between safety and catastrophe. She knew that the East Wing was always 10 degrees cooler than the West. She knew that Han Suk-jin took his green tea at precisely 6:15 a.m. in the study, his second cup at 10, and refused a third regardless of how long his morning work sessions ran. She knew that he moved through the house at night, not restlessly, not in the way of a man who couldn't sleep, but with the deliberate, purposeful movement of someone conducting surveillance on his own life. She knew to stay out of his way. That rule, unspoken, unwritten, but absolute as gravity, governed her existence in this house more than any other. Zara Okonkwo, age 29, born in Enugu, currently employed as a senior domestic staff member at the Han estate under the name Zara Kemi Okonkwo. The Kemi, a silent offering to a mother she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. The Okonkwo, a borrowed name, clean, untraceable, belonging to a distant cousin who had agreed, for reasons of love and loyalty, to let it serve as a shield. Her real name was different. Her real story was different. And the boy, the one sleeping in the small staff quarters room she'd been allocated, the one with the serious eyes and the careful hands and the habit of sitting very still and watching rooms the way a chess player watches boards, the boy was the most different thing of all. Ethan. That was what she called him here. His real name was something else. Something she whispered only in dreams and prayers, never out loud, never in this house, never within earshot of anyone who might connect a name to a bloodline to a truth that could unravel everything. He was 7. He had his father's eyes. She had spent every day of the last 3 years making sure no one ever knew whose eyes they were. The morning the world began to change began, like all catastrophic mornings, with something ordinary. A laundry request. 3rd floor. The private gymnasium wing. Mrs. Cho, the head of household staff, a compact Korean woman in her 50s whose efficiency was absolute and whose warmth was carefully rationed, had assigned Zara to the upper floors on Tuesdays. This meant the private library, dusting, no touching the books, the meditation room, floors, no furniture moved, and the towel exchange for the gymnasium and attached training hall at the end of the west corridor. The gymnasium she knew. She'd changed its towels 47 times in 8 months. It was a functional, state-of-the-art space. Mirrored walls, climbing apparatus, a rowing machine that cost more than her monthly salary. She moved through it invisibly, as she moved through all spaces in this house, quickly, silently, disturbing as little air as possible. The training hall was different. It was adjacent to the gymnasium, but separated by a heavy door, dark wood, no window, always closed, always locked in her experience. She had never been inside. The towel exchange for that room was handled by a specific staff member, a former military man named Young who worked directly under Suk-jin's private secretary and who had, in 8 months, never once exchanged more than 3 words with any of the other staff. This morning, Young was absent. Mrs. Cho had noted it with the minimal facial expression she reserved for disruptions to efficiency. "You'll handle the training hall today, Balagan," she caught herself. Okonkwo. Training hall. Towels. Door code is 4471. In and out. Yes, ma'am. Zara had taken the towels. Folded. White. Stacked with the precision Mrs. Cho demanded. She had walked the west corridor. She had stood before the training hall door. She had entered the code. The door had opened. And she had become someone she would never fully return from. The training hall was larger than she'd imagined. High ceilings, at least 20 feet, with exposed dark beams and walls of pale gray matting that absorbed sound the way certain materials absorbed light. The floor was polished hardwood, worn smooth in specific paths, the evidence of repeated, deliberate movement. Weapons racks along one wall, wooden practice swords, staffs, sparring gloves, items whose presence she registered with the peripheral vision of someone who had learned not to stare at things that frightened her. In the center of the room, a boy moved. Her son, Ethan. Her Ethan, who this morning had told her, over their shared breakfast of jollof rice she'd made from stolen pantry staples, that his favorite color was still green and that he'd dreamed about a bird that carried a sword in its beak. Her Ethan, who could not yet reliably tie his own shoelaces on the first attempt, who slept with a stuffed elephant named General, who laughed with his entire face in the way that children laugh before the world teaches them restraint. That child was here, moving across the training hall floor in forms she did not recognize but whose geometry she understood instinctively as not childhood. His feet were precisely placed, weight distributed with a consciousness of balance that 7-year-olds should not possess. His arms moved through a sequence: raise, hold, pivot, extend, each motion separated by a beat of absolute stillness that made the movement look less like exercise and more like speech. A language she didn't know, being spoken by a mouth she had made. And, in the far corner of the room, watching, Han Suk-jin. He stood with his arms folded across his chest, the white training shirt open at the collar, the black serpent tattoo rising from his collarbone toward his neck, its scales rendered in dark, precise ink, the creature's body disappearing beneath the fabric before reappearing at his left wrist where the sleeve was pushed back. He was still. Absolutely still. The way he was always still, a stillness that wasn't passive but active, a controlled containment of something that could, if released, do significant damage. He was watching Ethan. And Ethan was moving exactly like him. Not the forms, those were taught, sequential. The quality of movement. The economy. The measured breathing. The way stillness was held between motions as something meaningful rather than something empty. A 7-year-old boy moving through the room with the contained, deliberate precision of a man who had spent years learning that control was the most powerful force in any room. The towels fell from Zara's hands. Neither of them heard them land. She could not move, could not breathe, could not process the information her eyes were sending because the information her eyes were sending was impossible, or it should have been impossible. It had been designed to be impossible. She had built her entire life in this house around the impossibility of this exact moment. Her son, moving like him. Her son, in his room, in his space. His room, his space. The boy she had carried for 9 months and born alone in a clinic in Porto Novo because she couldn't go home and couldn't be found. The boy she had moved across 3 countries with. The boy whose identity she had hidden the way you hide a flame in a windstorm, with both hands, with your body, with everything you have. Moving. Like him. Suk-jin turned. He had heard the towels after all. His dark eyes found her across the training hall. Cold, sharp, carrying the same quality of attention she had been carefully avoiding for 8 months. The attention that felt less like being seen and more like being read. His expression didn't change. It never changed. "Mrs. Okonkwo," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. It had the resonance of a much larger room than any space it occupied. "You were expected." She couldn't speak. Ethan had stopped moving. He stood in the center of the training hall floor, looking at her. His serious eyes, dark, slightly wide-set, intelligent, moved from her face to Seokjin's and back. Reading the room. Always reading the room, this child who had been born into tension and learned to navigate it before he could read.
Yama, he said. Mom.
In Korean, he'd picked it up in the months they'd been here, absorbing the language with the effortless, terrifying speed of children. Are you okay? I'm fine, she managed. The words arrived by muscle memory alone. I'm fine, baby. I dropped the towels. She bent down, picked them up. Her hands were trembling. When she straightened, Seokjin was still looking at her, with an expression that was, on its surface, completely neutral. And beneath that surface, she had learned, in 8 months of careful avoidance, to read the beneath, something that was not neutral at all. Later, she would piece together how it had happened. Not the training hall, the larger arrangement. The sequence of events that had placed her 7-year-old son in a room alone with a man who should, under any rational construction of a universe, have been on a different continent. 8 months ago, desperate, low on money, her previous employment in a private household in Abuja terminated after the family relocated to the United States and offered to bring her along but not Ethan, because the visa process for a child is complicated. She had accepted that her network in West Africa was exhausted. Korea had been Auntie Funk's idea, a cousin of a cousin who worked in a Seoul-based agency that placed domestic staff in high-end households. Good money, quiet families, safe environment. She had arrived in Seoul in March. The agency had placed her at the Han estate within 2 weeks, faster than normal, she'd been told, because the household had specific requirements: discretion, intelligence, willingness to work long hours, and, unusual for a domestic position, the ability to speak English at near-native fluency. Seokjin, it turned out, conducted a portion of his business in English. He had never, in 8 months, conducted any business in her presence. What she hadn't anticipated, couldn't have anticipated, the universe being what it is, was that Mrs. Cho, in a moment of unusual pragmatism, would offer the staff childcare arrangement. The household runs a creche for staff children under 10, Mrs. Cho had explained on Zara's second day, with the brisk efficiency of a woman who managed sentiment the way she managed inventory, adequately and without sentiment. 3 mornings per week. Educational programming. The chairman approved the arrangement 2 years ago. Ethan had begun attending the estate's creche in April. By June, he had demonstrated, in the way that Ethan always demonstrated things, quietly, completely, without announcement, an aptitude for physical discipline that the creche's part-time physical educator, an elderly man named Master Beck, had described to Mrs. Cho as exceptional. Exceptional had reached the wrong ears. Or the right ones, depending on how you measured such things. Han Seokjin had been made aware of the boy's aptitude by his private secretary, who had been made aware by Mrs. Cho, who had been told by Master Beck that in 40 years of teaching children traditional Korean martial forms, he had never encountered a 7-year-old with such natural capacity for the stillness between movements. Stillness between movements. Seokjin had requested the boy be brought to the training hall for an assessment. Zara had not been informed. She had been changing linens on the 4th floor when her son was brought to a room she had never been authorized to enter by a man she had spent 8 months avoiding, to be evaluated for a quality she had been watching grow in Ethan since he was 4 years old, with a combination of wonder and terror. Because she knew where that quality came from. She had always known. That evening, Zara sat on the floor of her staff quarters with Ethan asleep in the narrow bed behind her, and she took inventory of the situation the way her grandmother had taught her to take inventory of threats, systematically, without panic, beginning with what was known and ending with what must be done.
Known.
Han Seokjin was aware of Ethan. Not simply aware, interested. The training session had no impulse. The forms Ethan had been executing were intermediate-level Taekian sequences that required weeks of prior instruction. Seokjin had been training her son for how long? When had the creche arrangement shifted into this? How many Tuesday mornings had she been on the 3rd floor while her son was in a training hall 30 feet away? She pressed her palms over her eyes. The serpent tattoo. She had seen it clearly today, the black scales climbing from collarbone to neck, the precise artistry of it, the darkness that seemed to move under the skin. She had spent 8 months not looking at it. Today she had seen it, and her blood had turned to cold water because she had seen a tattoo like it before.
Different design.
Same quality of intention. Same statement. This body is a document, and the document says dangerous. Unknown. Whether Suk-jin had any suspicion about Ethan's paternity. Whether anyone in this household had ever connected the name Okonkwo to the name she was born with. Whether the man who had fathered Ethan, the man she had spent 3 years fleeing, had any reach into Seoul. She exhaled slowly. Her son was asleep. His small chest rose and fell with the perfect regularity of a child who had not yet learned to carry the weight of adult terror. His face in sleep was soft, the seriousness dissolved, the watchfulness released, and he looked, in sleep, the way he had looked in her arms in the Porto Novo clinic.
New.
Untouched. She touched his cheek. "I will fix this," she whispered.
To him.
To herself. To whatever power in the universe was listening and had not yet decided what kind of story this would be. "I will fix it." Behind her eyes, Han Suk-jin's face. Cold, unreadable. Watching her pick up the fallen towels with the expression of a man who had registered something significant and filed it without revealing that he had. She needed to find out how much he knew. She needed to find out what, exactly, he was doing with her son. And she needed to do both without allowing him to see that she was looking. He had noticed her the day she arrived. This was not something Han Suk-jin would have admitted, not because it shamed him, but because admission was a form of exposure, and exposure was something he permitted only strategically. But in the private ledger of his interior life, the one he maintained with the same meticulous precision with which he maintained all of his accounts, he had recorded it. March 14th. New domestic staff member. Nigerian. English fluent. Quiet in an unusual way. The unusual quality was what had held his attention. Most people were quiet in his house because his house demanded quiet. The staff moved with the particular silence of people performing silence, a conscious, effortful suppression of sound that paradoxically called attention to itself. You could hear the effort, could feel the held breath, the suppressed footstep, the words swallowed before they reached air. Her silence was different. She was quiet the way certain rare structures are quiet, not because they're suppressing something, but because they're complete. The silence of something that doesn't need noise to communicate its presence. She moved through the house with a contained, purposeful stillness that reminded him, uncomfortably, specifically, of himself. He had noted it, filed it, returned to his work, but the noting had not stopped. In 8 months, he had observed, without appearing to observe, which was a skill he had refined to an art form, the following. She took the longest route between tasks. Not out of laziness. She was never lazy, but in a pattern that suggested she was mapping the house. Checking exits. Noting positions. The behavior of someone who had learned that knowing a space was survival. She studied people's faces with a subtlety that most would call attentiveness, and that he recognized as threat assessment. She touched her son's head when she thought no one was watching, with a ferocity of tenderness that was, in his experience, the most honest thing a human being could express. It required nothing. It concealed nothing. It was simply the gesture of a woman for whom that child was the non-negotiable center of the universe. He had begun training the boy in June. Not because of the boy, initially. Because of her. He had wanted to see what she would do when she found out. He had not anticipated what he would feel. Ethan was extraordinary. This was not paternal sentiment. Suk-jin had no reason for paternal sentiment toward a staff member's child, and sentiment of any variety was not a faculty he exercised regularly. It was assessment. Professional. The same eye he turned toward any talent that appeared in his orbit. The boy had the quality that Suk-jin valued above all others, the understanding that stillness was not the absence of action, but the preparation for it. Most children, most adults moved in straight lines. Stimulus to response. No gap. No space. No control. Ethan moved with a gap. A half-second of absolute composure between perception and reaction that was, in a 7-year-old, so unusual it was almost eerie. In the third week of training, Suk-jin had demonstrated a defensive pivot, a movement requiring the practitioner to hold perfect stillness on a single foot for 3 seconds before executing the turn. Most adults required a month to learn it. Ethan had done it on the 4th attempt, and then had looked at Suk-jin with those dark, serious eyes and said, in his careful Korean English hybrid, "Again?" Something had moved in Suk-jin's chest. He had not identified the movement immediately. He was not practiced in identifying interior movements. But in the days that followed, as he returned to the training hall morning after morning and found the boy already there, waiting, positioned, ready, he had begun to circle the feeling the way you circle something unfamiliar in the dark, trying to determine its size. It was not pride. It was not the satisfaction of a mentor. It was something older. Something that existed below the level of language, in the pre-verbal architecture of the body. Recognition. He recognized this child. Not from memory. He had no memory of this child. But in the way you recognize a structural principle in a building you've never entered. The bearing of the weight. The language of the form. The specific quality of presence that runs in blood, rather than being taught. He did not yet understand what he was recognizing. But on the morning Zara stood in the training hall doorway, and the towels fell from her hands, and she looked at her son moving like him, and went pale beneath her deep brown skin. On that morning, the feeling in his chest became a question. And Han Suk-jin, who had built empires on his ability to find answers, turned the question over in his mind like a stone whose weight he had not yet finished measuring. She was careful that evening. She moved through the dinner service with a performance of normalcy that had sustained her for 3 years, smiling at Mrs. Cho's instructions, delivering the chairman's tray to the study door, retreating before he could look up from whatever document consumed him. He looked up. "Mrs. Okonkwo." She stopped. Her back was to him. She turned slowly, deliberately, the way you turn towards something you've calculated the danger of. "Yes, Chairman Han." He was seated at his desk, dark wood, clean surface, a single document, and a cup of green tea placed precisely to the right. His training shirt had been replaced by a black dress shirt, open at the collar. The serpent tattoo was visible at his neck, the scales catching the desk lamp's warm light, the creature's body disappearing into his collarbone and reappearing at his wrist where the cuffs were turned back. His hands rested flat on the desk. The dark ink across his fingers, the smaller, denser patterns she had never looked at long enough to read, seemed to pulse in the lamp's glow. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 8 months, sir." Before that, the question was casual. His tone was casual. Everything about the delivery was calibrated to feel like small talk, the kind of offhand inquiry a man makes of staff without genuine interest. She knew better. A private household in Abuja. Before that, Lagos. "I have my references on file, with Mrs. Cho." "I know. I've read them." She hadn't expected that. Kept her face neutral. "Is there something I can help you with, sir?"
"Ethan," he said.
The name landed in her chest like a stone in water, ripples radiating outward from the point of impact. "Sir? Your son. How long has he been studying martial disciplines?" She weighed the answer, calculating how much truth to give, and which truth. "He's always been physically aware. Since he was small. His pediatrician called it proprioceptive intelligence. He understands his body and space." "Yes," Suk-jin said, as though she had confirmed something rather than explained something. "I noticed." Silence. He lifted his tea.
Drank.
Set it back with the precision of a man for whom even small actions are intentional. "He has potential," Suk-jin said. "Real potential. Not the manufactured kind that parents see in ordinary children. I'm referring to something structural." "He's 7, Zara said. And despite herself, despite every calculation that said quiet, invisible, minimal, she heard the edge in her own voice. Suk-jin heard it too. His eyes sharpened. Not with offense. With interest. "He's 7, he agreed. "And already doing what most adults can't." A pause. "I would like to continue training him. With your permission." With her permission. The phrase was so unexpected, so architecturally misaligned with everything she understood about the power dynamics of this house and this man, that she blinked. "My permission," she repeated. "He is your son." "He is." Firmly.
Precisely.
"He is my son." Something passed across Sukjin's face, so brief, she might have imagined it. A flicker of something she couldn't name. "Then I'm asking," he said. "Will you permit it?" Every rational thought she possessed said no. Said remove Ethan from his orbit, remove yourself, find another position, another city, another country if necessary, you have done it before. "I'll think about it," she said. It was the most honest answer she could give. And it was not a no. At 2 a.m., the estate was different. The daytime architecture of the house, formal, controlled, every surface curated for professional function, dissolved in darkness into something raw. The stone walls exhaled the cold they'd absorbed from the mountain air. The reflecting pool outside the east wing turned the moonlight into something that trembled. The corridors acquired depth and shadow that the daytime lighting had managed out of existence. Zara couldn't sleep. She lay on the narrow staff quarters bed with Ethan's warm weight pressed against her side. He had migrated in the night the way he always did, seeking contact with the certainty of a compass seeking north, and stared at the ceiling and thought about permissions and questions, and the specific quality of Han Suk-jin's gaze. She got up, wrapped herself in the cotton robe she kept on the door hook, filled a glass of water from the small sink in the corner. She needed air. The staff quarters had a small window that opened onto a side courtyard, not the formal reflecting pool garden, but a functional space, stone path, a few sparse trees, a wooden bench. She opened the window, breathed the mountain-cold night air. And then, because the universe had apparently decided that subtlety was no longer on the agenda, she saw him. Sukjin was in the side courtyard, standing, which was what he did when he was thinking. She had learned this over 8 months without meaning to. When working, he sat. When deciding, he stood. He was in dark clothing, training trousers, a black shirt, the collar open, the serpent tattoo at his neck catching the moonlight in silver blue, and he was simply present in the space the way a standing stone is present, rooted, unmoving, carrying its own weight with complete self-sufficiency. He was looking at the moon. She should have stepped back from the window. Instead, she watched. And then he turned, not fully, not toward her window, but slightly, at an angle that suggested he had peripherally registered a change in the side courtyard's atmosphere. He didn't look up, but his shoulders shifted, a fractional adjustment, the serpent on his neck tightening as his head tilted, and she had the sudden, vertiginous conviction that he knew she was there. She stepped back, lay down beside her son, pressed her face into his hair, which smelled, as it always had, of the specific combination of shea butter and childhood, and held him as though the holding were a physical defense against every truth she was trying to contain.
He stirred. "Iyama. Sure.
Go back to sleep. Is the man going to keep teaching me?" he murmured, already more than half submerged in sleep. "I like learning from him. He's quiet like me." She closed her eyes. He's quiet like me. 7 years old. And already reading the specific frequency of a silence she had been running from.
"Sleep," she said. He did.
She did not. 3 days later, a new element arrived. His name was Park Sung-ho. He was the estate's new grounds supervisor, late 30s, easy smile, the kind of uncomplicated handsomeness that Mrs. Cho observed with the resigned awareness of a woman who knew what uncomplicated handsomeness did to a household's female staff dynamics. He introduced himself to Zara in the staff dining room on his second morning. "You're a Konkwo, right? The one who does the upper floors." "Yes," she said. "Sung-ho." He extended his hand. His Korean was easy, casual, the accent of Seoul's easier neighborhoods. "I'm told you speak English." "Thank God. My Yoruba is terrible." She laughed despite herself. "How do you know I speak Yoruba?" Mrs. Cho's briefing. She briefs very thoroughly. He sat across from her without being invited, with the comfortable confidence of a man who assumed welcome. "She also told me you make jollof rice on Sundays and it smells incredible from the staff corridor. Is that true?" "It's true. I would do considerable work," he said seriously, "for a bowl of jollof rice." She laughed again. Genuine. The sound surprised her. It had been a while since she'd laughed at something that wasn't Ethan. From the corridor, from the precise position where the staff dining room's glass panel offered a sight line to the interior, Han Suk-jin passed. He was moving to the east wing. His private secretary walked 2 steps behind him, speaking quietly about a schedule. He did not look into the staff dining room, but he slowed, by half a step, so brief that only someone watching very carefully would have registered it. Mrs. Cho, who was watching very carefully because watching carefully was the entirety of her professional practice, registered it. She said nothing. She filed it. Later that week, Suk-jin made a decision that Secretary Park, a precise man who managed the chairman's schedule with the gravity of someone managing a national defense operation, classified under unprecedented personal initiative. He began taking his morning tea in the East Garden. Not the formal reflecting pool side. The East Garden, the functional courtyard where the staff bench was, where the sparse trees grew in unpredictable lines, where the side window of the staff quarters opened onto stone pavement. He sat on the stone bench for 20 minutes each morning. He did not bring documents. He did not take calls. He sat in the morning air with his tea in both hands, the serpent tattoo visible at his wrist, the tribal-influenced ink of his mother's heritage threaded through the Japanese-influenced scales of his father's tradition, and he thought. On the 3rd morning, Zara came out. She stopped when she saw him. He didn't turn. "The tea is better out here than inside," he said. "I don't know why I took so long to discover it." She stood at the garden's edge. Calculating, he could see it in the particular set of her shoulders, the way her fingers curled slightly at her sides. She was deciding whether to retreat. "Ethan asked about the training again," she said instead. Something in the garden stilled. And he set down his tea, half-turned on the bench. Not fully, just enough to include her in his sightline without demanding she enter fully into the conversation. She crossed the garden, sat on the bench's far end, 6 feet of stone between them, the morning light falling across her in the specific amber of early autumn, her natural hair pulled back, the small gold hoops she always wore catching the light. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked. "What he becomes." The question was precise, surgical. She asked questions the way she moved through rooms, with purpose, not habit. "Because talent that isn't developed is a form of violence," he said. "Letting it sit unused, unformed. It damages the person it belongs to." She studied the garden stones. "He asked me if you have a son," she said.
Carefully.
The quality of air between them shifted. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't know." She looked up. "Do you?" His jaw set. A barely perceptible tightening, the only visible expression in a face that gave nothing away casually. "No," he said. "I don't have a son." He thought. She stopped herself. "He said you train him like a father would." The silence that followed lasted 7 seconds. In those 7 seconds, Han Suk-jin did something he almost never did. He felt something without immediately classifying it. It arrived without taxonomy, a pressure in his sternum, dense and unfamiliar, connected somehow to the image of a 7-year-old with serious dark eyes doing a 3-second balanced pivot on the 4th attempt, and then looking up and saying again, "Go get your son," he said finally. She froze. "What?" "The 3 of us will have breakfast. In the East Garden. Tell Mrs. Cho I requested it." She stared at him. His expression was closed. Unreadable. But in the dark eyes, in the place beneath the controlled surface where she had learned, in 8 months and especially in the last week, to look, she saw something that made her hands go still. Something that looked impossibly like need. "Okay," she said, and went to get her son. Ethan arrived in the East Garden at 7:15 a.m. with his shoes on the wrong feet and General the stuffed elephant under one arm and the expression of a child who had been promised something interesting and intended to evaluate whether the promise was kept. He looked at Suk-jin. Suk-jin looked at him. The morning light fell between them. "You moved the pivot yesterday," Suk-jin said. "Your left hip was early. Did you feel it?" "Yes," Ethan said seriously. "I felt it at the top." "At the top it is too late." "I know." Zara watched this exchange with her hands folded in her lap and her pulse at a rate she could not regulate, and the particular feeling of standing very close to the edge of something enormous and trying, through sheer force of will, to make the edge recede. They sat on the stone bench, Suk-jin at one end, Ethan in the middle, Zara at the other, while a staff member Zara hadn't met before appeared from the house's east entrance with a tray of food that was neither a formal breakfast nor a casual one but something in between. Good food, well prepared, presented without ceremony. Ethan ate with the focused intensity he brought to everything. Suk-jin drank his tea. Zara held her cup with both hands and watched the two of them in the peripheral vision she had developed for exactly this kind of watching, where looking directly would reveal too much. They were the same. Not in the surface things, not in skin tone or height or the obvious physical markers. In architecture. The way they both positioned themselves on the bench. Weight forward, spine straight, neither slouching nor performatively upright. The way they both paused before speaking. A half-second gap. That same gap she'd noticed in Ethan for years, the gap she now understood was not childhood development but inheritance. The way they both held their cups with both hands. Ethan noticed first because Ethan always noticed. He looked at his own hands. I looked at Suk-jin's. Adjusted his grip to match. Suk-jin's eyes moved to adjust. His jaw tightened. And in the brief, exposed second before he controlled the expression, in the half-second gap before his stillness reclaimed the surface, Zara saw something cross his face that turned her blood to ice water. Not suspicion. Recognition. The same word. The same quality. The same geological shift she had seen in the training hall. Recognition. He was starting to know. She didn't know what she would do when he finished knowing. He has spent his life reading people like documents, and the document in front of him, the one with serious dark eyes and a grip that mirrors his own, is beginning to tell him a story he was never supposed to read. Zara has one move left. Run. But Han Suk-jin has never lost anything he decided to keep. And he has just decided. She began planning the exit that afternoon. Not in panic. Panic was a luxury she had never been able to afford, even before she understood why. She planned with the systematic, survivalist precision that had carried her across 3 countries and 8 years of living adjacent to danger, without being consumed by it. Step 1. Financial assessment. She had 4 months of wages saved in a bank account held under the Okonkwo name. Enough for 2 flights. Enough for a deposit on a room in whatever city she chose next. Step 2. Documentation. Ethan's passport, the one Mrs. Cho held in the household staff documents file along with all estate employees' papers, was accessible. Mrs. Cho left the filing cabinet unlocked on Thursday evenings when she conducted her weekly household audit. Zara had noted this in her first month. She had filed it without acting on it because she had not needed to act on it. She needed to act on it now. Step 3. Timing. She would give herself 1 week. 7 days to execute quietly, to avoid triggering whatever alarm system Han Suk-jin's pattern recognition had already begun building in the back of his extraordinary mind. To leave before the knowing became certainty. She was making her inventory in the staff quarters bathroom, the one room in the house that felt reliably private, when Ethan knocked.
Yama.
He left this. She opened the door. Her son held out a folded note, cream paper, minimal writing, the handwriting she recognized from the estate's internal communications. Precise, economical, absolutely controlled. East Garden. 6 p.m. Bring Ethan. She stared at it. Step 1 through 3, she thought, may need to be accelerated. She brought Ethan. Not because she wanted to. Because not bringing him would have been a statement. A visible deviation from the behavioral pattern she'd maintained for 8 months, and visible deviations attracted attention, and attention was the last thing she could afford right now. Suk-jin was already in the garden. He stood at the garden center. Not the bench this time, but the open space near the sparse trees where the light fell between branches in moving patterns. He held 2 wooden practice staffs. When Ethan appeared, he held one out without preamble. Grip at the center. Knuckles down. Ethan took the staff with both hands and gripped it with the automatic precision of a child who had already been taught this. Like this? Move the right hand 6 centimeters toward the end. Ethan adjusted. Suk-jin watched. Nodded once. Zara sat on the stone bench with her hands folded and her spine upright, and the particular stillness of someone performing calm. They trained for 45 minutes. She watched every second. And in those 45 minutes, she saw things she had been trying not to see for the past week. The way Suk-jin corrected Ethan's form with a precision that was not the precision of a teacher assessing a student, but of something more cellular. The instinct of a body recognizing a body that shares its mechanical grammar. The way Ethan absorbed correction without the ego bruising that usually accompanied instruction, accepting adjustment with the simple pragmatism of someone who understood that correction was information, not judgment. By the way, at the end of the 45 minutes, when Suk-jin said enough for today and took back the staff, Ethan looked up at him with those dark, serious eyes and said, "Same tomorrow?" And Suk-jin, Han Suk-jin, the silent blade, the man whose emotional register operated within a range so narrow that his own secretary of 6 years had described him as possibly constitutionally incapable of informal expression, Han Suk-jin looked at this 7-year-old boy and said,
Yes.
"Same time." And the quality of his voice when he said it was something Zara had never heard from him. Warmth. Not performed. Not strategic. The involuntary warmth of a man who has been cold for a very long time and has, without planning for it, encountered a source of heat. She dug her fingers into her own palms. 7 days, she thought. 6 now. He found her in the West Garden the following morning with a thermos of coffee and an offering she hadn't asked for, but found she needed more than she'd anticipated. Uncomplicated company. "You look like you're planning something complicated," Sung-ho observed, sitting beside her on the low garden wall with the easy confidence that seemed to be his factory setting. "I'm planning a laundry rotation," she said. With that expression? "That's a geopolitical strategy." She looked at him. "You're very perceptive for a grounds supervisor." "I was an intelligence officer for 4 years. He said it without drama, with the same tone he'd used to discuss jollof rice. "Before I decided grass and trees were more honest than people." She studied him for a moment, recalibrated. "And now you're here," she said. "And now I'm here." He offered her the thermos. "Coffee." She took it. The morning was cold. The mountain air had a bite that deepened every day as autumn progressed, and the coffee was good. Dark and precise, the way good coffee should be. "How long have you worked for him?" she asked.
Carefully.
"The chairman? This is my first month. But I know his type." He stretched his legs. "Served under a man similar. Not the business, different sector, but the same quality of mind. Absolute precision.
Complete control.
And underneath the control," he paused, looking at the garden, "something that never got to be ordinary. You know what I mean?" She knew exactly what he meant. "I've seen him with your son," Sung-ho continued. Conversationally. No apparent subtext. "In the East Garden." Her hands stilled on the thermos. "He's never done that before," Sung-ho said. "Not with any staff member's child." "I asked Mrs. Cho, discreetly. She said he's never shown personal interest in any household matter." He turned to look at her. His expression was open, intelligent, and without cruelty. "You might want to think about what that means." "It means he finds Ethan's aptitude interesting," she said. "Professionally." Sung-ho looked at her for a moment longer than was entirely comfortable.
"Sure," he said.
And didn't push it. But from the east wing window, from the precise position where the morning light and the window angle created a clear sight line to the garden wall, a stillness that had been there for 3 minutes shifted, adjusted, withdrew. The serpent at Suk-jin's wrist tightened beneath his cuff as he turned from the window. His jaw was set. His eyes were cold in a way that was specifically different from their habitual coldness. "Secretary Park," he said. His secretary appeared immediately. "Sir." "Park Sung-ho. Grounds supervisor. Hired last week. Full background assessment. I want it on my desk by noon." "Yes, sir." He returned to his desk. His hands on the surface, the serpent ink, the tribal patterns, were very still. The background assessment arrived at 11:47 a.m. It was thorough. Secretary Park was nothing if not thorough, and contained everything there was to know about Park Sung-ho. The intelligence career, naval intelligence, 2 commendations, voluntary resignation. the subsequent landscape architecture certification, the 3 previous grounds supervisor positions, the clean financial record, the social profile of an uncomplicated man who had chosen a quiet life after a complicated career. Nothing threatening. Nothing useful. Suk-jin set the file aside and opened a different one. He had asked for this file 3 days ago, quietly, through channels that bypassed the estate's normal administrative processes. He had not asked Secretary Park. He had used a different resource, one of the 3 people in his life who knew both his faces, the businessman and the other one. The file contained everything that was publicly accessible about Zara Kemi Okonkwo, which was, as he had suspected, very little. The name existed in database records for approximately 19 months, the approximate age of the Okonkwo documentation. Before that, it existed nowhere, which meant it was constructed. A cover identity, competently built. Not professionally. There were minute inconsistencies that a cursory check wouldn't catch, but that his resource had flagged. Tax record generation date slightly misaligned with the employment history claimed. A minor inconsistency in the Abuja household reference that suggested the letter had been written by someone closely mimicking the employer's documented communication style rather than by the employer herself. She was hiding. From whom? That was the question that had been occupying the back of his mind with increasing insistence for the past week. And, connected to that question, braided with it, inextricable, was another one that he had been circling for days in the way you circle an object in the dark, trying to determine its shape. He opened his desk drawer, removed a photograph, not of Zara, but of himself, taken approximately 7 years ago. A rare photograph. He had been photographed without his knowledge at a Lagos business event. Someone had sold the image to a financial publication that had since been purchased, and its archives sealed. He kept it because it was the only image he possessed of himself from that period. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at the profile photograph from Zara's staff file. Not at her. At the corner of the image where, in the background, slightly out of focus but present, Ethan stood. He studied the child. The serious eyes. The forward tilt of the head. The specific quality of stillness. His hand. The serpent. The tribal geometry. The inherited ink of 2 bloodlines. Moved involuntarily to the photograph. Stopped a centimeter from the image. The question he had been circling resolved, suddenly, into a shape he recognized. Into a truth. His breath left him slowly. The training hall. The pivot on the 4th attempt. The grip adjusted exactly 6 centimeters without being told twice. The breakfast table. The cups held in both hands. The child adjusting his grip to match. He trained him like a father would. Han Suk-jin sat very still for a very long time. The dragon and serpent on his chest rose and fell. Rose and fell. She was in the 3rd floor library when he found her. Not because he had tracked her schedule, though he had, but because she had chosen the library deliberately. A room with 2 exits, a room that felt, in its architecture of accumulated knowledge, like a space that might support the weight of difficult truth. She was dusting. She knew he was there before he spoke. The atmospheric shift. The withdrawal of ordinary sound. She continued moving the cloth along the shelf edge, because stopping would have been an admission. Zara. Her name. Her real name, not Okonkwo, not Mrs., not the professional designation.
Zara.
Spoken with the quiet certainty of a man who has done his research.
She stopped.
Close the door, she said.
He did.
She set down the cloth. Turned. He stood at the library center. Black shirt, open collar, the serpent tattoo at his neck and collarbone exposed in the afternoon light that came through the library's high windows. His hands were at his sides. The tribal patterns across his knuckles were still. His expression was the most controlled she had ever seen it, which, from him, indicated the most significant emotional pressure she had ever felt from him. Tell me something true, he said. The echo of a different story, the ghost of a different pair of people who had said those words in a different room, passed through the universe without touching this one. You've been investigating me, she said. Yes. And what did you find? Not enough. And enough. He paused. The name Okonkwo is borrowed. Your documentation is 19 months old. Before that, nothing. You built a new identity for yourself and your son, and you came here. A pause. Why here? It was the position that was available. Don't do that, he said quietly. Don't be strategic with me. Not now. She looked at him. You know, she said. It wasn't a question. I suspect, he said. Tell me. The word landed in the library like a stone. Simple. Absolute. The weight of it pressing on every surface.
She had planned for this.
She had rehearsed versions of it in the staff bathroom with the water running, in the small hours of the morning when Ethan slept against her side, in the taxi she'd taken through Seoul on her one day off in 8 months. None of the rehearsals had included the look on his face right now, because in all her planning, she hadn't accounted for what it would feel like to see a man discover that he was a father. His name is not Ethan, she said.
Her voice was steady.
Almost. His name is Adewale Hanakonkwo. I named him for both of us. I couldn't, she stopped. Breathed. I was already in Cotonou when I found out. I was already gone. The situation between us was, she stopped again. I remember the situation, he said.
Carefully.
As though the words were each a delicate structural element being placed in a load-bearing position. 8 years ago. Lagos. The Aditaran Summit. We were both attending in different capacities. We were two people making a decision we weren't prepared for, she said. And then the situation changed. Things happened. I needed to leave quickly, and I left, and I didn't know I was carrying. I didn't know for 2 more months, and by then I was already somewhere that wasn't Lagos, and I was already someone that wasn't. Who were you then? He asked. Before Okonkwo. She looked at him. I was the daughter of Chukwuemeka Adeyemi, she said. Which is why I am not that person anymore. The name. She watched it land in his face, watched his eyes change, watched the controlled mask not fall but flex, the way a wall flexes under pressure, revealing that the materials are not stone but something that can move. Adeyemi, he said.
Low. Careful.
My father and yours were not friendly, she said. In the way that men in your world are not friendly. Your father is dead, he said. The bluntness of it was not cruelty, it was the specific bluntness of a man who deals in facts and who is currently trying to process too many facts simultaneously. He died 2 years ago. But the people around him, the ones who blamed your family for the circumstances of his death, they are not dead. Silence. The library held them. They've been looking for me, she said. Or rather, for the daughter of Chukwuemeka Adeyemi. They don't know Adewale exists. I've been very careful. Not careful enough, he said. And his voice had changed, had dropped below its already low register into something that was not quite anger and not quite fear, but the place where those two things lived before they separated into themselves. If they're looking for you, and they're connected, if anyone traced your placement to this estate. I know. You've put yourself inside my walls while people who want leverage over me are actively searching for someone connected to my bloodline. I didn't know, she said. When I came here, I didn't know it was you. The agency, the household was listed under the Hanjin Holdings umbrella. There were 3 layers of corporate name between the estate and your name. I didn't know until my 2nd week, and by then I had Ethan settled and I needed. Her voice broke. She stopped. Reset. I needed the stability. I needed one place where we could breathe. I thought the layers would protect us. I thought if you didn't know who I was, we were safe here. He was looking at her with an expression that she had never seen on his face. It contained many things. Fury, controlled, cold. The fury of a man who has discovered that the fortress he built around his private life has a door he didn't know existed. Fear, the specific fear of someone who has just understood the precise dimensions of a danger. And something else. Something that existed beneath both of those, beneath the reaction and the assessment, in the place where neither strategy nor control had ever fully reached. The look of a man who is looking at the mother of his child and realizing, in the same moment, that he has spent 7 years without both of them. His name is Adewale, Sukjin said. Not a question. A recognition. Trying it in his mouth. Learning the shape of it. Yes. And he knows nothing. He knows I love him. He knows I've kept us safe. He knows, she swallowed. He knows that his father is someone I couldn't stay near. He doesn't know who. Sukjin crossed the distance between them. Not quickly. Never quickly. But with a directness that had been absent from every previous approach. No angles, no periphery, no careful calibration of distance. He stopped 2 feet from her. Close enough that the serpent tattoo was in full, clear view. Close enough that she could see the pulse at his throat, steady, even, the only indication that the machinery of his body was processing something enormous. Adewale is in danger, he said. I know, because of my name and your name, and the intersection of them. Yes. And you have been managing this alone for 7 years. She looked up at him. Her dark eyes, which had been holding composure for the entirety of this conversation, betrayed her now, just for a second, just a flash of the exhaustion underneath. The bone-deep, years-long exhaustion of a woman who had been holding a fortress walls up with her bare hands. Yes, she said. Something in his face collapsed. Not dramatically. Not visibly to anyone who hadn't learned to read the architecture of that face in 8 months of careful study. But to her, to Zara, who had been watching him with the attention of someone whose safety depended on it, and had become, somewhere along the way, something more than strategic, she saw it. He reached out. The serpent on his knuckles. The tribal geometry his mother hadn't known would one day come to rest against the face of the woman who had borne his son.
He touched her cheek.
One hand.
Gently.
You are not alone in this anymore, he said. The words were not tender. They were not romantic. They were the words of a man making a declaration in the only language he had ever fully mastered, the language of commitment, of territory claimed, of walls built and held. She pressed her hand over his. And for the first time in 7 years, Zara Adeyemi, who was Okonkwo, who had been Adeyemi, who was tired of being anyone but herself, let someone else hold part of the weight. The call came the next morning. Not to Zara, she had no phone number that could be found. To Secretary Park, via a coded inquiry routed through a dummy consulting firm that Sukjin's intelligence network had been monitoring for 2 years, a shell entity associated with the remnants of Chukwemeka Adeyemi's former allies. The inquiry was simple. Surgical. Is there a Nigerian woman employed at the Han estate?
Young. Child.
Possibly traveling under an assumed name. Sukjin received the transcription of the inquiry at 6:03 a.m. By 6:04 a.m., the East Garden tea was forgotten. By 6:05 a.m., he was in the communications room that officially didn't exist on any floor plan of the estate, with 2 of the people who knew his other face, and the coldness that had settled over him was not the habitual cold of a controlled man, but the operational cold of one who has identified a target and begun to move. They're close, said the man to his left, Lee, who had served the Han network for 12 years and who had the particular gift of speaking difficult truths without inflection. The inquiry routing suggests a Seoul-based operative. Someone already in country. How long do we have? Before they confirm she's here? 48 hours. Maybe less. Sukjin's hand rested on the communications desk. The serpent coiled across his knuckles, the tribal patterns catching the cold light of the screens. He looked at the transcription. At the words young and child and assumed name. Activate the secondary protection detail, he said. She and the boy are not to leave the property without an escort of no fewer than 4. Do it quietly. I don't want her to know the timeline yet. Sir, she should be told. She will be told. His voice was absolute.
By me.
When I have a full picture to give her. Not fragments. He turned to Lee. Find the operative. Before they find her. And when we find them, he looked at the screen. Deliver a message, he said. In the language they understand. He found her with Ethan, Adewale, in the East Garden at 4 p.m. The boy was practicing the pivot form independently, running it in slow repetition, each iteration slightly more refined than the last, with the focused patience of a child who had been taught to regard improvement as its own reward. He didn't notice Sukjin's approach. Or he noticed and didn't react. The second possibility struck Sukjin with a force that was becoming familiar. He moves like me. He is like me. He is mine. Zara noticed. She rose from the bench. Immediately, body language shifting from at ease to the alert, controlled posture she adopted when the situation required it. Adewale, Sukjin said.
The boy stopped, turned,
looked at Sukjin with those eyes, which Sukjin could now read clearly for what they were. A mirror, genetic and spiritual, of his own. Yes, sir? Go inside and ask Mrs. Cho for your afternoon snack. Tell her I said the good ones. Adewale looked at his mother. She gave a small nod. He went inside, General tucked under his arm, his steps precise even on the garden path. Suk-jin waited until the east door closed. There's an operative in Seoul, he said. No preamble. She deserved the full truth, delivered without the false cushioning of gradual disclosure. Connected to the Adeyemi network. They're looking for you. They don't know you're here yet, but they will within 48 hours, possibly less. She didn't collapse. Didn't break. She received the information the way she received all difficult information, with a stillness that was not absence of feeling but extreme, disciplined containment of it. How long have you known? Since 6 a.m. And you waited until now because I needed a full picture before I brought you fragments. He paused. I wanted to give you information, not panic. I don't panic, she said, with a quiet sharpness. No, he agreed. You don't. I know that now. He faced her fully. They won't reach you. Or Adewale. I need you to understand that, as a fact, not a reassurance. Facts require evidence. I have a protection detail already deployed around the property. My team is locating the operative. By tonight, the threat will be managed. She studied him. Managed. Neutralize. People, Suk-jin. You're talking about people. I'm talking about people who want to use my son as leverage against me, he said. And the word, my son, fell from him with the weight of something that had been held back and could no longer be contained. I'm talking about people who have been looking for you, for the daughter of my father's enemy, carrying evidence of the intersection of our bloodlines, for reasons that have nothing to do with family and everything to do with power. She was quiet. You said my son, she said. He is my son. You've known for longer than I admitted to myself. He paused. The serpent at his wrist caught the afternoon light. I need you to trust me. I've been trusting myself for 7 years. I know. And you've done it extraordinarily well. He stepped closer. Not the 2 feet of the library. Less. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. I told you that yesterday. I'm telling you again. And this time I'm telling you because there is an active threat to our son, and the resources I have are the resources that can eliminate it. Our son. The phrase entered her the way roots enter soil, slowly, with the quiet force of something that intends to stay. What do you need from me? She asked. Stay inside the property tonight. Keep Adewale close. Don't alarm him. He doesn't alarm easily. No. The ghost of something moved across Suk-jin's face. Not quite pride, not quite pain. Something between them. He doesn't. The estate went quiet at 9 p.m. A different quiet than usual. Not the habitual quiet of a controlled household settling into the rhythms of evening. This quiet had weight, structure. The silence of a building that had become, without announcement, a fortress. Zara knew the difference. She had lived in enough of both to read it. She put Adewale to bed in the staff quarters. He went without complaint, tired from the afternoon training, content in the way of a child whose physical energy has been well spent. He was asleep within minutes, General tucked under his chin, his breathing the steady rhythm of complete unconsciousness. She sat beside his bed in the dark. At 10 p.m., a soft knock. She opened the door. Suk-jin. He was in dark clothing, training wear, the casual configuration of someone who had moved through the property's perimeter rather than its formal corridors. The serpent tattoo was fully visible at his neck and collarbone in the corridor's low night lighting, its crimson undertones subdued in the blue-gray ambient glow. His hair, always precisely kept, was slightly disturbed. His hands, the serpent and tribal geometry, were at his sides, open, not folded, not at rest. He had been in the field. The operative, she said quietly. Found. Detained. The broader network is being addressed. By morning, there will be nothing left to trace back to you. She exhaled. Come in, she said, and stepped aside. He entered the small room. Too small for a man of his presence, the walls immediately contracting around him. But he moved carefully, as he always moved, settling into the chair beside the small desk without displacing more air than necessary. He looked at the bed, at Adewale, at his son. She watched him look. 7 years. All the mornings and evenings and scraped knees and first words and fever nights and the specific heartbreak of watching your child cry and not being able to fix what hurts. All of it lived without him. All of it compressed into this moment where a man who had built an empire of control sat in a child's bedroom looking at a sleeping 7-year-old and discovering what he had missed. His jaw tightened. The serpent at his neck seemed to coil closer. "He likes green," Zara said softly from the doorway. "And birds. And puzzles. He's been able to read since he was 5. He figured it out himself, from picture books mostly. He doesn't like loud noises, but he's not afraid of them. He just," she paused, "recalibrates." Sukjin's eyes moved from the boy to her. "Recalibrates," he said. "Like you." He looked back at the boy. "I would like," he said carefully, each word placed with the precision of someone handling something fragile, "to know everything. Every year. Whatever you can tell me." "That's going to take a long time," she said. "I have time." A pause. "I want the time." She crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed beside Adewale's sleeping form. Sukjin remained in the chair. Between them, the small child breathed, peacefully oblivious to the tectonic restructuring of the adult world occurring on either side of him. "He has your hands," she said. "I noticed it when he was born. The way he held his fingers." Sukjin looked at his hands. The serpent. The tribal geometry. The ink of a life lived in power and shadow. "I'll teach him better uses for them," he said. "You already are." The room was quiet. The night outside was quiet. The estate, having expelled its threat, settled into a peace it had not known in 8 months. And in the small staff quarters chair, Han Sukjin, the silent blade, the man whose stillness was a weapon and whose control was a fortress, sat beside his sleeping son and learned, for the first time in his adult life, a stillness that was not defensive. A stillness that was simply presence. The warmth of it moved through the room like the first heat of a fire lit in a cold space. Zara felt it. Didn't look away. Dawn came gray and clean, the mountain air cold and mineral, the kind of morning that felt like a beginning. Adewale woke first. He sat up, immediately alert, as he always was, no groggy transition from sleep, and looked at the man in the chair. Sukjin had not left. He'd slept in the chair, if sleep was the right word for the light, watchful rest of someone whose body had learned to maintain awareness even in unconsciousness. When Adewale's movement registered, his eyes opened. They looked at each other. "You stayed," Adewale said. "Yes." "Why?" A pause. The serpent on Sukjin's neck. The tribal patterns on his hands. The morning light beginning to seep through the small window. "Because I wanted to be here when you woke up," he said. Simply. Without the decorative language of adult emotion management. The language of fact, which children respect more than poetry. Adewale considered this. "Okay," he said. "And then, is there training today?" "Yes." "With the staff or without?" "Without." He paused. "Just us." Adewale looked at him for a long moment, those serious eyes, doing what they always did. Reading the room, reading the person, finding the weight of things beneath their surfaces. "Are you my father?" he asked. The question arrived like a stone through glass. Simple, direct, the question of a child who has been thinking it for a while and has simply decided that the thinking is sufficient and the asking is next. Zara, on the bed behind him, went absolutely still. Sukjin looked at his son. The serpent coiled. The morning waited. "Yes," he said. One word. Delivered with the same absolute, undecorated certainty with which he delivered all true things. Adewale, Adewale Han, Adewale Okonkwo. Adewale, who had his father's hands and his mother's resilience, and the specific quality of stillness that would, in time, be recognized as the inheritance of 2 extraordinary bloodlines, looked at the man in the chair, looked at his mother, looked back. "Okay," he said again. And in that okay, in the remarkable, pragmatic, world containing okay of a 7-year-old who has received the answer to a question he has been asking in the silence of himself for as long as he has had language, was everything. Zara pressed her fist to her mouth. Sukjin rose from the chair, crossed to the bed, sat beside his son, and put his arm, the serpent at the wrist, the tribal geometry at the knuckles, around a 7-year-old boy who leaned into it with the immediate, trustful weight of a child who has found what was missing. Zara watched. The tears came. She let them. 3 days later, Han Sukjin called a meeting. Not in the estate's formal conference suite. That space was for business, and this was not business. He called it in the library. He told no one in advance. He simply arrived with Secretary Park and Lee and the estate's head of security, and he told them what he was about to do. The reaction was varied. Secretary Park absorbed it with the face of a professional managing a significant deviation from protocol. Lee absorbed it with the face of a man who has served someone long enough to have expected the unexpected and has still been surprised. The head of security absorbed it with a face that communicated nothing except the reliable readiness to execute whatever was required. "The boy is mine," Sukjin said. Simple. Declarative. Not asking for processing time. His mother has been living under a threat that was partially created by the intersection of my family's history and hers. The threat has been eliminated. I'm now beginning the process of formalizing what exists. Formalizing, Secretary Park said carefully. Sir, there are the network implications, the Adeyemi connection, if it becomes known that you have a son by. When it becomes known, Sukjin said. Not if. When. I will make it known. On my terms. In a manner that converts any potential leverage into a statement of claim. And the woman? Lee asked. Without judgment. Professional assessment. The woman, Sukjin said, and his voice changed, shifted in the way that a room shifts when a window is opened and outside air enters, is not a variable in a strategy. She is. He stopped, looked at his hands. The serpent, the tribal geometry, the ink of his mother's hand and his father's world. She is the reason, he said. He dismissed them. He found Zara in the library. Again. She appeared to have a habit of choosing that room when the weight of things required a space large enough to hold it. She was not dusting this time. She was sitting in one of the leather chairs by the window, her legs tucked beneath her, a book open in her lap that she was not reading, her eyes on the garden where Adewale was visible through the glass, moving through his pivot forms with the focused, joyful intensity of a child who has found something he loves. She heard Sukjin enter. He's been out there for an hour, she said, without turning. I know. I watched from the study window. He sat in the chair opposite hers. The afternoon light fell between them, warm, amber, the quality of autumn light that felt both an ending and a beginning. The threat is completely resolved, she asked. Completely. The operatives network has been dismantled. The entity responsible has been informed, in terms they understand, that any further action targeting this household will be met with a response they cannot survive. She nodded. And the documentation? My cover identity. Unnecessary now. He paused. I'd like you to be Zara Adeyemi again. Here. In this house. In the world. As much as you want to be. She looked at him. That name is connected to people who. That name is connected to you. And to Adewale. And the connections that made it dangerous have been severed. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, the serpent visible at his wrist. I'm not asking you to perform anything or announce anything. I'm saying, in this house with me, you don't have to be anyone other than who you are. She was quiet. Outside, Adewale executed a perfect pivot, held it for 3 full seconds. His small face, visible through the glass, broke into a grin of pure satisfaction. He's never grinned like that at a physical accomplishment before, Zara said softly. Because before, he didn't have an audience that understood what the accomplishment cost. She turned to look at him. You understood, she said. I understood from the first time I saw it. He paused. I didn't understand why I understood. At the time. She looked at her hands. The gold hoops. The thin bangle she wore always. A gift from her grandmother, the last physical connection to a life she'd left. "What do you want?" she asked.
From this.
"From us. From what happens now." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to know my son."
Properly.
As his father, openly, without the architecture of concealment around it. He paused. "I want him to grow up knowing both halves of himself, the Korean and the Nigerian, the Han and the Adeyemi, without shame and without hiding. And me." The silence. "The library. The amber light. You," he said, "are not a separate category." She looked at him. "I've been in this building for 8 months," she said. "In that time, I've been affected by you. In ways I didn't plan for and haven't fully processed. I know. You watched me. I watched you. You arranged things. My safety. The building access. Things I didn't ask for. Yes. That's controlling, Suk-jin. It's the kind of behavior that—" "I know." He cut through it gently. "I know what it is. And I know what it comes from. And I know that the version of care I learned was indistinguishable from control because no one in my life ever taught me the difference." He paused. "I'm not asking you to excuse it. I'm asking for the time to learn the difference. With you. If you'll give me that." She studied him. The controlled face. The cold eyes that were, right now, carrying the most undisguised things she'd seen in them. Asking. Genuinely asking. Not demanding, not maneuvering, not deploying the machinery of a man who is accustomed to getting what he wanted through strategic architecture.
Just asking.
"The difference between care and control," she said slowly, "is consent. You care for someone in the way they need. You control them in the way you need." "Yes," he said. "So, ask me what I need." The silence. He looked at her. "What do you need?" She had not been asked that question, genuinely, without agenda, in longer than she could retrieve. "I need Adewale to know he is loved. By both of us. Securely, permanently, without conditions."
"Done," he said.
Without hesitation. "I need to be Zara. Not Okonkwo. Not the hiding version. Myself." "Done." "I need," she stopped. Her voice had caught on something. "I need to not be afraid anymore."
He stood, crossed to her.
Sat at the arm of her chair, close, present, the serpent at his wrist at the level of her shoulder, the morning cold scent of him, cedar and green tea and something that was simply him, filling the small space between them. He placed his hand over hers. The tribal patterns. The inheritance of 2 bloodlines. Her hand beneath his. "You won't be," he said. "I will spend whatever time you give me making that true." Outside the window, Adewale's voice carried through the glass. "Abeji. Father, did you see the pivot?" The word, Abeji. A Yoruba word for the honored other. For the one who comes in pairs with the self. For the counterpart that makes the whole complete. Her son had chosen his own word for him. In the language of her people. In the language of the identity she had protected all these years. Suk-jin's hand tightened around hers. He turned toward the window, raised his free hand. A wave, controlled, precise, entirely him, but real. Adewale beamed. Zara closed her eyes. Let herself be held. A month later, the estate in the first grip of winter, the mountain air sharp, the reflecting pool beginning its slow crystallization at the edges, the gardens going spare and beautiful in the way of things stripped to their essential structure. Han Suk-jin called a gathering. His inner circle. His network's key principles. The people who moved the foundations of the world he'd built, both the visible one and the other. 20 people. The dining hall of the estate, properly set for the first time Zara had ever seen. Formal, warm, the dark wood of the table set with the specific combination of Nigerian and Korean culinary tradition that Mrs. Cho had produced with remarkable, wordless grace when given the instruction. Suk-jin stood at the head of the table. He was not a man who made speeches. But he was a man who understood the architecture of moments, the specific structural requirements of a declaration that would hold weight. "This household is changing," he said. Quiet. Absolute. The voice that rooms lower themselves to accommodate. "What I am now, and what this family is now, That is the permanent configuration. Anyone in this room who has a problem with the configuration will find the door and their severance package waiting on the other side of it. He looked around the table. No one moved. No one was going to move. 20 people who served the silent blade did not survive their positions by misreading declarations. Adewale Han Adeyemi is my son, he said. He will be known as such. Publicly, formally, in every record and registry relevant to my name and my assets. He is the heir of everything I've built and everything I am, Korean and Nigerian, both heritages equally, without hierarchy. Adewale, seated beside his father, small, serious, wearing a formal shirt with the top button already undone because formality had its limits, looked around the table with those dark, intelligent eyes. His mother, Suk-jin, continued, and his voice changed, shifted again in that way, the window opening, the outside air entering, is not the maid. She was never simply the maid, even when she was working as one, because the work a person does and the person who does it are not the same thing. Zara Adeyemi is the woman who raised my son with a courage and an intelligence that I will spend a long time learning to deserve. Zara, seated to his right, kept her eyes on the table. She was crying.
Silently.
With the controlled grace of a woman who has spent years keeping her emotions from becoming other people's information. But the tears were there, catching the candlelight, tracing the planes of her face, falling onto the tablecloth. Under the table, Suk-jin's hand found hers.
Squeezed.
She squeezed back. Adewale, on his other side, leaned against his father's arm with the absolute trust of a child who has found the thing he was missing and has no intention of letting it be uncertain again. This is my family, Suk-jin said. Simple. Declarative. This is my family. The 20 people at the table absorbed it. Most nodded. Some raised glasses. Lee, at the far end, said nothing, but the expression on his face was one that only a man who had served someone for 12 years and watched them choose power over everything for 12 years could wear. The expression of witnessing someone choose something more. Spring arrived slowly. As it does in the mountains, not all at once, not in the dramatic declaration of southern climates, but gradually, incrementally, each degree of warmth negotiated and earned. The reflecting pool unfroze in March. The boxwood showed new growth in April. The sparse East Garden trees put out buds that opened one by one into something that wasn't quite blooming yet, but was unmistakably becoming. Adewale trained in the courtyard every morning. Suk-jin was always there, sometimes instructing, sometimes simply present, standing at the garden's edge with his tea in both hands, watching his son move through forms that grew more refined with every week, the quality of stillness between movements deepening into something that was no longer eerie, but was simply his. Adewale's own. Inherited, yes, but claimed. His. On a Tuesday in April, Zara was in the library. Not dusting. Not hiding. She had converted a corner of it, with Suk-jin's unhesitating agreement and Mrs. Cho's diplomatic reorganization of one shelf, into a small architectural workspace. A drafting board, drawing supplies, the beginnings of a correspondence with a Korean architecture school she'd been unable to finish her degree with, exploring what it would take to resume. She was sketching. Suk-jin appeared in the doorway. She looked up. He carried 2 cups of barley tea, her preference, which he had learned and which had begun to appear every afternoon with the same quiet reliability as the security details and the cleared threats and every other form of care he was learning to express without converting it to control. He set 1 cup on her drafting board, looked at her sketch. "What is it?" he asked. "The East Garden," she said. "Redesigned. I want to expand it. Make it big enough for him to train in properly, not just the forms, but sparring when he's ready. And there," she pointed to a section of the drawing, "a space for sitting. Wide enough for 3. He looked at the sketch. The garden she was drawing was not merely practical. It was, he could see it in the way she handled space, the way she always handled space, emotional. The curved borders that made the enclosure feel held rather than confined. The openings that allowed light in from specific angles at specific times of day. The central space, wide, level, generous, that was designed for movement, but also, clearly, for witness. For the act of watching someone you love, Do the thing they love. The bench at the south end, he said. Move it east by 3 meters. The morning light will hit it better. She looked at the sketch, adjusted the line. Better, she said. Yes. He sat in the leather chair with his tea, and she returned to her sketch, and the library held them in the way that good rooms hold people who belong in them, without effort, without pressure, simply as the natural consequence of a space that has been well designed. After a while, from outside the window, from the garden, from the morning air, from the particular frequency of a child's voice that was becoming, day by day, less hidden and more fully announced, Adewale called. Abeji, Iyama, come and see. They went to see. Together. They always would. If this story already has its hands around your heart, please like, share, and subscribe.